Hi, everyone. Welcome to this mini class we're running this evening on coaching, particularly looking at the role of a coach in challenging situations. My name is Be Pannell, and I'm the course leader of the coaching program. And I'll be taking you through this mini class and also talking a little bit at the end about our graduate certificate in applied coaching, and just make sure that we've answered any questions that you might have around coaching and our course as well. So feel free to use the chat function, those of you who are live. Those of you who might be listening to the recording after the fact, we will give some details at the end. You can reach out to one of our course advisors if you have any questions in regards to our programs. Right at the very end, those of you who are live will pause the recording, and if you wanted to come off mute and ask any questions directly, we'll have time for that in this session as well. So let's get started. Before we do, in the spirit of reconciliation, ACAP acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. We also support the Uluru Statement from the Heart and the compelling call for voice, treaty and truth-telling. We're committed to advancing reconciliation and ensuring that everyone in our Australian community has access to information about the significance of constitutional recognition for First Peoples and what a voice to Parliament is and why a referendum is needed to change the Australian Constitution. So in this session, I'm going to basically run, it's going to be like a short class, although it won't be quite like a class because in our live classes, if you choose to attend and enroll in our course, we actually have quite a lot of interaction where you're on camera and you're coming off mute and you're talking to the educator. Today, because we're recording this, we'll just be using the chat function, but really encourage as much interaction as you feel comfortable in regards to asking questions, and I'll pause and respond to those. And as mentioned, today's topic is looking at the role of a coach in challenging situations. So some of you may already have coaching experience. Some of you might be interested in developing that. And what I say to people who are looking at potentially studying coaching is, I actually think that coaching is a really great skill to have just in relation to getting along with other people. I actually think it can make you a better parent, potentially improve your intimate relationships, with a partner or a husband or wife or whomever, and potentially even make you a better friend, because the focus on coaching is really a mindset where we're supporting the other person to explore what's going on for them and helping them to come up with their own solutions and their own ways forward. So it's really certainly a very empowering way of relating to other people. And we'd find that people that do this course often will comment back on the impact it's had on their family life, particularly those of you who might be in that challenging situation of parenting young adults. So I guess that's something to keep in mind, that coaching can be applied in many different settings. So very briefly, just a little bit about me. So I've developed this graduate certificate in applied coaching. I'm an experienced executive coach, worked in organizations and with individuals for many, many years. And my area of interest is really about how coaching can help us face the challenges of today and tomorrow, particularly with the impact of things like the climate crisis and global warming and artificial intelligence and, financial crises and you name it. We're all facing those challenges. And my research is showing that there's really a new level of leadership skills that are really required for people to be able to navigate these challenging situations. And so really looking at how coaching can support people to develop those skills around much more broader understanding of systems and perspective taking, much deeper level of emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills, much more sophisticated ability to think strategically. There's a whole list of skills that I think leaders are really needing to develop to step up to these challenges. But before we go on, just very briefly, a little bit about ACAP. So we're celebrating 40 years this year. We've been delivering specialist courses since 1983 in the areas of coaching, counselling, criminology, psychology, social work, management, law, IT. There's a whole lot of different areas that we specialize in, and we have campuses right across Australia and of course online. And just to, I guess, reiterate that if you choose to do this graduate certificate in applied coaching, that course is fully online. So you can study anywhere in Australia. We get lots of people who may have challenging distance issues, or even accessibility issues, or even family commitments. And I really love the way that the internet and things like this Zoom have created much more sense of equality and access for people to access really great education. So we've had over 20,000 graduates over those 40 years, but particularly I wanted to emphasise that this coaching program's now been running for about 2 years, and we've already had about 150 graduates come through and finish the 4 units that make up that graduate certificate. So and also, I guess, just one brief thing about this course before I segue into talking about coaching is that I think it's a really good mix of postgraduate training. So it's a graduate certificate and it's an ICF accredited course, which I can unpack what that means towards the end of this presentation. But it basically means that we cover all the requirements that the ICF needs you to meet in terms of your training if you wanted to become a member. And then you just need to follow a couple of other steps from your end, and then you can apply to be an accredited coach with the ICF, which stands for the International Coaching Federation. But enough about me and enough about the course and enough about ACAP. I'd like to just pause and actually hear a little bit about you. And the reason why I do this is because I think it's really important that we have, as much as possible in this kind of manufactured situation, a bit of a two-way conversation. So I'd really encourage you in the chat box to just list your preferred name and just a sentence or two on why you are interested in coaching, why you've come along to this session this evening. And I'll just take a few minutes to read out some of the responses, because I think it can give you a really good sense of the kind of people who may be in your cohort if you do choose to study this course. So don't be shy. Feel free to just jump in with your name and your interest in coaching, and that will just help us to create a few more threads linking you and me and other people in this session today together. And as I mentioned, that in a live class, we would actually encourage you to be on camera and coming off mute and actually introducing yourself and talking. And we really do encourage you to meet and work with other people in your cohort, in your class, as a way of maybe practicing coaching outside of class, developing your network, having some support in your studies and so on. Because I think, studying online, it can be a bit isolating, and we really do make sure that as much as possible, we bring you all together. So enough about me talking. I would love to just see what people have put into the chat. So Joe, welcome. You're a financial coach and working at Good Shepherd. Thank you for being the first one to jump in. Sam, you're keen to consider accreditation for a side hustle, and coaching is certainly one of those things that I think as a side hustle can be really effective and also actually quite lucrative. I really love the fact that the leadership coaching that we teach in this course can be actually really well paid, and potentially even moving from segueing from a side hustle to something that you can make a living from. Nino, looking to build your skills so you can offer more value to my clients. Welcome. Bronwyn, business consultant, coaching is a big part of your role, not had much formal training. So welcome, Bronwyn. We also get people coming to do this course that might be doing quite a lot of coaching, but they haven't had the ICF accreditation. So they choose to do this course to fill in those gaps. And we really make sure that it's a really key thing with adult learning is that we tap into the wisdom of the group, that the educators and myself, we don't presume that we're talking to people that are like a blank slate. That mode of teaching hopefully has gone out the window, hopefully 40 years ago, but really wanting people to bring into the conversation some experiences that they've had so that we can build on that kind of the wealth of knowledge in the group. Mawa, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly, recently had a coaching session with a mindset coach and really liked the way that she was working with you, so that brought an interest. So thank you and welcome. Christine, in your performance coaching role and interested in making what you do official with a qualification. That's fantastic. Silvana, here today to see if coaching would be something you'd like to study because you've just finished the diploma in counselling. So welcome, Silvana. My background, actually, I worked in counselling for many years and then moved into coaching. And what I found with the counselling was often looking at the past. And then I'd get to a stage with my counselling clients where they'd say, okay, now what? And we'd start to look at what was the future that they wanted to build for themselves. And that's when I moved into doing additional training and ended up finding that I just loved that focus on what might I become, what do I want in my life, what do I want to build, and much less of my focus now is much less focused on the past and much more in the future. So it's an interesting process, and we do talk in one of the very early classes about making sure that we differentiate that in coaching we're not offering therapy, and we'll take you through how you differentiate that to make sure that what you provide is what you're committed and trained to provide, and not moving into therapy. But that's for another conversation. Tanya, you're interested in coaching due to your own life experience and the lack of appropriate support available. Okay, so that's an interesting perspective, Tanya, in that you as a student in this course potentially will receive that kind of coaching from others. Some of the students kind of feel like they get coached out. So that's another reason why people choose to do this course. Teresa, nutritionist, 15 years, looking to add coaching to offer with your corporate clients who need help to make healthy changes. Fantastic and much needed. Sarah, currently studying to be a counsellor and wanting to broaden your approaches. Another one. So thank you, Sarah. And I really do think it's a lovely combination, having the counselling and the coaching together. Ali is interested in the correlation between emotional well-being, decision-making at the executive level in corporate settings. Coaching would have great insight into this, and yes, it does. One thing just to kind of mention that the coach training that this course is based on applied psychology, and so therefore evidence-based psychology. So we're teaching you things where, some academic coach has gone off and done some research, usually in a corporate setting, on what is most effective. Often it's taking tools from psychology and transitioning them into a coaching environment, and then demonstrating via evidence-based that these things are effective. So, for example, using cognitive behavioral approaches to coaching executives can be really powerful in that balance on emotional well-being. Bo, looking to see if this is for you. Thank you for jumping in. Georgia, interested in developing your skills and experience as a leader. Wow, there's quite a lot of you, so I might have to skip a few. I'll go a bit faster. Sandra, you're a registered nurse. Great, wanting to provide coaching for women around limited beliefs. That's fantastic. Micah, a spiritual guidance practitioner and interested in coaching to support your current work and to help support clients further their purpose. Fantastic. Karen, in coaching to give back support to others, currently a management accountant and degree qualified in accounting. Yes, coaching can be a really interesting add-on to any kind of professional expertise, because it moves you much more into that kind of managing people and using coaching as a tool. People use the term leader as coach. So using coaching as a tool when you're working more in management roles. Maya, interested in criminology and coaching, is one of the courses that's part of criminology. So here you are. Thanks, Maya. Netta, thinking about what sparks your interest. And Sally, using coaching daily in the workplace to drive change to receive the ICF accreditation. It's fantastic. Annabelle, counselling and understanding how coaching links in. Deborah, curious to see if it could be for you as a counsellor and social worker. Great. This is really helpful for me as well, because as I go through and talk now about coaching in challenging situations, I can contextualize it a little bit to this audience. So Lisa, currently studying counselling, wanting to find out if coaching is what you want to study. Karen, you're from Kenya, interested in developing coaching skills and starting your studies and career in social work. Helen, nearly at the end, learning what it entails in teaching. So you can see already we've got people from lots of different backgrounds, and super interesting that, that kind of mixed together in a classroom would be really exciting. Priska, in background is in social work, particularly NDIS, interested in using coaching to broaden your approaches. Shadi, hopefully I pronounced your name. You're in Bukura, working as a case manager. Counselling and looking at using coaching as well. Sandra's got a background in psychology and counselling, and Avi interested in changing careers, possibly trauma support and skills from coaching. So fantastic. Really good to hear from you and to have a bit more of a sense of some of you that are in this session. And as I said, the kinds of people that are interested in this kind of program. So I wanted to make sure that we were really clear in terms of our definition of what is coaching, not because I'm sort of wanting to in any way, kind of say the obvious, but it's a sort of word that's used in lots of different scenarios. And sometimes coaching is seen as kind of advice giving, and really want to make sure that we differentiate that coaching is a conversation. This comes from the ICF, where there's something that the client or the coachee is moving towards. And so the GROW framework that we've got here, if you're interested in kind of finding out coaching 101, check out this on YouTube. There's quite a lot on it. It's basically the absolute fundamental framework of a coaching conversation, where we say to someone, okay, what might you want to focus on today? And that's looking at the goal. Okay, I want to stop procrastinating. And then the reality piece is, well, tell me a bit more about this procrastinating. What's happening for you? When do you procrastinate? When do you not? How is it a problem? When do you notice it getting really extreme, and so on? So you spend time, the way I describe it, is kind of swimming around the issue. And what happens then, once you get to become a really good coach, you ask quite powerful questions that might end up helping the client to deepen their understanding of their own behavior. And so I had an executive that I was coaching a little while ago who did come to me for that same example, was procrastination. And as we were swimming around in the reality of it, we actually worked out that the real issue was he had self-identified that he didn't like to upset people. And so we unpacked that a little bit more. And he kind of admitted that he was a bit of a people pleaser. And by being this people pleaser, he was avoiding any situation where he would have to kind of confront someone or maybe upset them or maybe say no to them as their manager. And so the goal ended up changing. It wasn't as much directly about procrastination. That was kind of the side effect of actually working on his issues around people pleasing. And so then we changed the goal, and then we started to look at what options. Okay, now that you understand this, you talked about a particular staff member who had some performance issues that he was avoiding. So we unpacked, okay, how might you want to respond here? He went away and did some homework and tried that out, which was that way forward. And then we came back and kind of kept iterating around it. He got more of an understanding as to what was going on in his own patterns. He tried some things that might have worked and didn't work, and so on. And as a result of that process, we, orbit around this framework in a lot of depth, but often going in and out in no clear, linear way. We sort of weave backwards and forwards. But he was able to really increase his level of self-awareness around this particular issue. And as a result, it was about session 6, I touched base with him on, you remember when you first came to me and you wanted to talk about procrastination? Now that we've done all this work together, where are you at with that? And basically the issue had gone away. It was no longer a major issue in his life because he dealt with the underlying things that were causing that. So basically, coming back to those first 3 points on the slide, that when we have a goal with a client, we really want to understand what might be underneath that. And we do find the goal will often shift. And we're using questions to help the person to understand. As they create different sets of meaning around their own behavior, then that then shifts their behavior. So we don't make them do something, they do it themselves. This guy stopped procrastinating himself because he understood what was really driving that behavior. So that's where the psychology piece comes in. And we do quite a lot in the course around really unpacking, understanding the link between, say, addictions and motivation and changing behavior, and what stops us getting changed, and habits, and how all that works, and how to work out where someone is at in that readiness to change pattern. And then we do quite a lot of work around how you can ask and frame questions in a way that is supportive of where the client is at, but it uses applied psychology in helping them to really understand themselves. So that's just a really quick sort of definition of what is coaching. Another example, which I won't go into in as much detail, I've got here is this solution-focused coaching. So it's a very simple framework. Again, you could probably find an explanation on YouTube, where you say to someone, I could say to this client, where in your life have you not procrastinated? So we look at if there's a problem, we look at where is there a solution? When has this person been successful? When has this person been successful in completing the work or negotiating a contract or doing whatever it is that they're avoiding? And then, okay, what have you learned from that situation about yourself that you could apply here? What particular steps did you take then that were successful, and how can you replicate that? So that's a really important part of coaching, is focusing on the solution that really helps them to disengage from their spinning wheels and focusing on what's not working. You go, okay, well, what is working and how can you do more of it? So it's, again, they're very, very simple frameworks. It's kind of like the sort of thing we'd cover in sort of the first half of week 1. And in the course, we go, as I say, into lots of other different frameworks. But I wanted to just give you a sense that when you're working with a client, then you'll be thinking a whole lot of things in your own mind, for example, this growth framework or solution focused or applied psychology, and that will in turn inform the kinds of questions you're asking. The client might not even realize what you're doing, but having that understanding of human behavior really enhances your ability to provide that level of coaching support to clients. So I'm just going to pause there because it's a lot of talking, and just see if there was any comments in the chat. Looks like there was just one other person that's introduced themselves, so welcome, but there's no questions there. So feel free, if as I'm going along, if you do have any questions, to pop those in the chat, and I'll check in on those after the next couple of slides. So the next thing I wanted to sort of come back to is this definition of what is coaching psychology. I pretty much mentioned this, but very much coaching informed by applied psychology that has a lot of research behind it. So the master's degree that I did in coaching, and then the PhD study I did in coaching, I had to read so many academic articles. It was a little bit crazy. Probably, I think, ended up being close to 3,000. It was 2,500 to 3,000 papers on this topic of people writing and researching what works in human behavior. And so, if we have them, there are particular techniques that we might say people in the coaching world use, but if we don't have that evidence base, we tend not to use them in this course, because we want to make sure that you're only learning things where there's been research, and research that's demonstrated that the particular technique is effective. And so that's another reason why I think coaching is effective, is because you develop much more of an understanding of applied psychology, which I think actually helps our interpersonal skills in general. Okay, so now just a few points I wanted to talk about with the topic of today, which is looking at the role of a coach in a challenging situation. Now, the challenging situation, it might be your coaching client themselves is overwhelmed and in a challenging situation, or a toxic work environment, for example. Or it may be the client themselves that actually is coming across as quite difficult themselves. So they're my 2 points that I've got in that point 1. So one could be coaching challenging clients, and the other could be coaching clients that are maybe not so challenging, but their environment is challenging. And, there's a lot of different layers to unpacking that. But one of the things I actually wrote a paper on this a couple of years ago on working with difficult clients. And one of the things that I like to think of whenever I'm finding that someone's behavior is what I would classify as difficult or challenging, is really trying to understand what's driving that behavior. So, looking at this second point here, looking at how does this person show up to me? What is my experience of them as their coach? And trying to understand what might be the underlying need that coaching client might be trying to meet. So, I wanted to put in here some examples of some coaching questions. So I've had, say, a client who was sent to coaching. It doesn't happen a lot, but they were sent to coaching because basically it was either you get coached or you get fired. So this person was having lots of conflict in the workplace. And so, you could come back to that growth framework. I'd be asking questions about, what's going on for you when you feel like you need to confront someone or have an argument with someone. It might take us a couple of sessions to build that level of trust, for example. But, what's going on in your mind? What are you thinking? What's, are you frustrated? Are you feeling impatient? And then just helping that person gain greater awareness as to their own behavior. And then trying to get them to understand, what do you think you are trying to really achieve in that? And I don't mean it in a kind of rude way, like, what do you think you're doing? But I'll ask it in a way of, if you look at what you're doing there, what was the underlying thing that was driving that? What did you really want out of that situation? And you'll often get a client go, gee, that's a good question. Or, oh, I hadn't thought of it like that before. And by giving them that time in a confidential space to really unpack their own behavior, give them that sense of, respect and unconditional positive regard that we would do in a counselling situation as well, you'll find that the client will themselves start to pivot in their own behaviour, where they don't need to kind of, you could say, act out, and they'll start to develop that, as someone mentioned in the chat, that a higher and more sophisticated level of emotional intelligence to go, you know what, right now, I'm actually stressed out of my brain. I need some time out. I don't need to have a fight with someone. I need to go for a walk around the block, go and get a coffee or something, and to just take a few deep breaths and then revisit this. So, this is one way that we might work as a coach, is helping someone whose behavior is coming across interpersonally as very difficult to have greater awareness around how that's impacting on other people, and then potentially even upskilling them around how they can ask for their needs to be met, how they can disagree while still, maintaining a, healthy respect, how they can be influential in a way that's not so abrupt. There's a whole lot of layers and nuances around how we might work with a client in that. So it's interesting whenever I get a client that, or even if I'm working in a group setting and I've got someone in the room that seems to be kind of difficult, I find that rather than, rolling my eyes and going, oh, how annoying, I wish I didn't have to put up with this, I actually get really curious of like, what's going on with this person? Usually the people that are kind of more vociferous, more noisy, they actually really care about something. So if I can understand what's driving their behavior and what they really care about and tap into that, then, often you can get quite a profound shift in behavior. And I can think of an example of someone who started a workshop basically kind of listing all the things wrong with their job, complain. I thought, oh no, I knew that I had another 8 people in the room and had to sort of navigate that. But by giving this person a little bit of attention, but asking some questions that helped for them to shift how they were seeing it, and then keeping on to the agenda of whatever it was that we were talking about in that particular workshop, but acknowledging what it was that they were trying to address, I ended up kind of developing a kind of connection with this person. She became like a raving fan, and anything that I said or did, she was happy to comply and do, and thought it was amazing. So, there was a few steps to that, but I think the key thing was I was listening for what was underneath and driving that person's behavior. They really wanted to be heard. They really wanted, what was important to them to be considered. And by meeting that need, the behavior of their pattern changed quite dramatically. So enough about that. I'll just pause and see if there were any comments in the chat about that. So Marwa has mentioned that, if you've got a client where there's a sense of, boundary issue, where there's either some kind of threat or even rudeness or even lack of respect, you certainly can, and I would suggest that, yes, so I'm suggesting that we can work with difficult clients in a way that is still respectful and safe for us as a coach. And, if anyone was to be outright, completely rude and disrespectful, I wouldn't coach them. But I might actually say to them, hey, did you know that came across and that seems to be quite a rude kind of comment? I'm just wondering what's going on for you there. I might at least try and engage them in a bit more of a conversation around that. And if I'm not able to, then yes, I would end that session. But I find that most of the time I don't need to, because the message I give to people is, I'm respecting you. I expect respect in return. Let's work together. And, most of the people that are really not prepared to meet those kind of guidelines will tend to self-select out of the work that we do anyway. But yeah, I'm certainly not advocating that we put up with any kind of abuses as we're coaching. So another thing, it's sort of, I touched on it earlier, a little kind of technique that you might want to think about, and we do go into this in a much more detail in that first unit in this course, is to understand where that person is at. It might be a client or it might be a colleague, where they're at in their readiness to change. And this comes from a model that's actually very famous. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's called the trans-theoretical readiness to change model. Trans meaning it's crosses a whole lot of different theories. So it's basically readiness to change. And if you go onto YouTube, you'll see loads and loads of really great explanations of this framework, which I won't be able to go into now. But basically, someone might be at a stage where they're actually not ready to change, but they're also not aware that there are problems. So, someone that's being sent to coaching, following from the previous example, where they don't realize that no one likes them, no one wants to work with them, they're not involved in any projects, and they're kind of on the brink of getting the sack. And so my role as a coach would be then to just start to very gently bring some awareness as to what's going on through maybe asking some really key questions, getting them to do some homework. I might even use a psychometric, which gives me 360 data, which allows other people to give feedback on that person's behavior, and then gently take the person through. It can be really tough sometimes taking a client through feedback where people have said, this person's rude, arrogant, and I don't want to work with them. And how do I raise someone's awareness in a way where they then start to be aware, this is a second point, aware that there's something that they need to change, but they become a bit ambivalent, as in they're like, yeah, too bad, or okay, I can see the point of changing, but I don't want to lose my power that I have at work. Everyone will think I'm weak if I start being more soft and, caring about others. So what happens is they're kind of weighing up the pros of changing and the cons of changing, and the pros of staying the same and the cons of staying the same. And so as a coach, we'll teach you in the course how you work with that kind of ambivalence and the kinds of questions you would ask to help someone to really shift from, actually changing my behavior is going to be better off for me than staying the same. The benefits of change outweigh the pain of, staying the same. And so then the person moves into this next stage, which is much more, all right, I know that I need to be more considerate or kind or whatever it might be. Okay, now I'm preparing to do that, but where do I start? And so the coaching conversation at this level is very, very different. How do we help that person set up some practices, for example, in their workday where they revisit and they re-look into how they've come across with others, and what do they do when they disagree with someone? What resources might you give them to help for them to navigate that in the moment? And then what happens is they start to really implement some of these tools and start to maintain this change. And so there might be, moments where they revert back, which is very, very common. And so a coaching conversation might be, how do they learn from those mistakes? And then certainly, how do they sustain that change over time? So I've given you some examples of those coaching questions as I've gone through that. So hopefully that's sort of been helpful, where you'd ask, tell me more about, what's going on when this happens, or how do you think these other people are responding? Or, okay, so you've tried this, what worked, what didn't work? What do you think you might want to do more of? Who do you look like and behave like when this is no longer an issue? What is it that you need to do to bridge the gap between that person in the future and who you are now? So lots of different questions that we can ask as we're coaching someone in that environment. So I thought that it'd just be really helpful to bring in this idea of a readiness to change, because coming back to the comment in the chat by, who was it? Oh, there's a few other comments I've missed, but Marwa's point about, if someone's really rude and abusive, they actually are more likely to be at that sort of much more early readiness to change, as in they're not aware, not ready, or they're ambivalent. So we'd work with them in a very different way than if someone is trying to implement some changes and keep slipping back. So before I move on to the next slide, I'll just check if there's anything else in those comments that I need to respond to. So Tanya has asked a question about this course in regard, because the examples I'm giving are in the workplace. So we do call this course, it's a graduate certificate of applied coaching focused on leadership coaching. And so by that, we do tend to use more workplace conversations, and you certainly can use the coaching in a life coaching situation, but we won't be in this course teaching you the kinds of skills that often come up in life coaching scenarios. So if you really want to focus on life coaching, which might be things like weight loss and relationships, and might even have an element about careers and self-motivation and so on, there are a load of other courses that may be more suited, and I want to make sure that we're really clear up front about that, because this really is focused on much more applied psychology in workplace situations. Okay, and that answered Sandra's question. Bronwyn, the change, yes, the framework of moving through awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement. It is a really great little acronym. Thanks, Bronwyn. And there's a little bit more on YouTube around that as well, which is linked in with this readiness to change framework. So I think it's G. Kara, I'm not sure your name in the chat. The toughest coaching situation and the most common themes. So just briefly, just check how we're going with time. So in terms of the toughest coaching situation, I think it's the really tough ones are the ones where the client is not aware that there's a problem, and they can spend the whole coaching session blaming other people, even blaming me as the coach. So working with people that could even be considered narcissistic. And if you're interested, I've recorded a podcast a couple of years ago now during COVID on working with narcissism in the workplace. So just Google my name and the word narcissism and that will come up. But people that are narcissistic, that really focus on the blame is everyone else. And what happens with a narcissist is they have a very fragile sense of themselves. So if they feel attacked or criticized in any way, they become extremely defensive. We've probably all encountered a narcissist in our lives. And so because they have such a fragile sense of self and therefore very defensive, it's quite difficult to get underneath those defenses and get them into this readiness to change. And we do find, in terms of the coaching research, that people with very strong narcissistic tendencies do tend to avoid coaching because they're not really prepared to look in the mirror, that level of accountability. So they're certainly the challenging ones. In terms of the most common themes and underlying issues, I will often work with people who have recently been promoted to more senior roles, and they're trying to navigate that role and trying to understand the skills needed to, go through a merger and acquisition, or go through a restructure, or move from being an operational manager to a more strategic manager, or, try and change the culture in their environment and so on. So, I think often the underlying issues are still really come back to each individual has a coping style, me included, has a coping style of what they do under pressure. And so the common theme is helping the person understand what is their weak spot, when do they go into that, and how do they kind of mitigate or avoid that. So, for example, someone I coached recently, their way whenever they get stressed is they get really kind of technical, and they'll read the details, and they'll shut their office door and, spend all this time kind of researching and turning into a bit of a beaver, and not actually having conversations with people, and kind of avoiding, the difficult conversations and so on. So in coaching someone like that, helping them to understand and look at different ways of coping and responding to stress rather than going into researcher mode. A lot that I could say on that one. G. Kara, I'm not sure your name. if a person, I'm not sure your name either, but if a person sees things that could be better, they're comfortable where they are, they don't want to lose the entitlements they have, that sort of comes back to that decisional balance. So basically, often people will not change their behavior until it becomes, so uncomfortable maintaining the current behavior. They talk about an alcoholic hitting rock bottom, that they say, the experience of drinking is no longer worth it. The price of going through detox and withdrawal and addiction recovery is worth it, because this is not worth it. This is hell. So we don't tend to require our clients to hit rock bottom in that same way. But when we are looking at changing behavior, there does seem to be that moment for each of us where we go, right, that's it. I've had it with, even coming to weight loss or fitness or diet and exercise. Right, that's it. I'm not going to do this anymore because it's just not worth it. So helping understand, our clients understand the psychology around that readiness to change can be really important. So Sandra's asked a question about how to apply this to a family member. And I'd say whenever you're applying it to a family member or a friend, my main word is to go gently, because people can feel really judged, of course. And as much as possible, the mindset of coaching is coming with a curious mindset where you're asking questions and helping the person explore the situation for themselves. And then, of course, helping them to shift into, okay, now you've explored it, what might you want to do differently, or what are you prepared to commit to differently? So there's a lot that I can sort of talk about. It's kind of beyond the scope of today's session, but the simple answer to your question, Sandra, is bringing that curiosity, that open-mindedness, and that questioning, helping the person to talk through what's going on for themselves and asking them questions like, what are your options here? What have you noticed? What would you like to be different? What could you do differently? How can you keep yourself accountable? That kind of thing. Okay. Resource or model outlines a line of questioning to help clients guide to self-awareness. The first thing that comes to mind, Ali, is actually the research on cognitive behavioral coaching. So perhaps even check that out on YouTube or online and just see the kinds of questions that you could ask, which is basically helping someone to understand how their thinking is linked to how they're feeling and how it's linked to their behavior. And also another tool would be to look a bit more detail into solution-focused coaching. So in terms of just someone's asked a question about my role, I might just pause that one because I'm just aware I've got a couple more slides to go through. Yes, it's certainly, thanks, Tanya, for your response about the life coaching. But certainly I think in terms of the way that this role, someone asked, how is this role really challenging? I think it's, you really need to have done your own inner work as well. One theory is you can't hold a space, so to speak, bigger, psychological, understanding bigger than what you've already gone through yourself. So there's certainly an element of what will make you an effective coach is doing your own developmental work. And that's part of what happens in this course when you receive coaching as you go through the program. All right. So I've kind of touched on this and I won't have as much time to spend on it as I thought I would, but just to think about, it sort of links in with what I said a few minutes ago, that whenever any of us are under pressure, there's some really robust research that's been shown time and time again that we tend to have 3 different responses, and they're pretty straightforward. We move away from the situation, we become distant and cynical, like, oh, look at that, that person's ridiculous, or I can't believe this, or can't believe they're doing this now, or whatever. And that might be our way of dealing with discomfort. And I'm not saying it's a problem. It's more when this shows up in someone's, say, leadership style or interpersonal style, then if they understand, okay, whenever I feel uncomfortable, I move away. How can I do this in a more constructive way? It might be that I take some time out, I do some journaling, I go and talk to a trusted friend, rather than turn it into moving away in a kind of negative capacity. So that's one element. We move away. Someone else might move towards. So this is my client who is the people pleaser, where they become quite compliant or even rescuing of others. We've probably all seen that, where, that person's heavily involved in the lives of other people to the point where they don't actually have to really kind of focus on themselves. They have that sense of, satisfaction and well-being by being a helper. But in a workplace or, in other situations, it can actually really hinder people, because one, they actually get exhausted looking after everyone else, and two, it can really affect someone's productivity, and also the ability to give other people constructive feedback, or drive change, or whatever else it might be. So that's the moving towards. And then the moving against, so I kind of think one's back, one's forward, and one's crossways. So the moving event against is someone that's just really confrontational. And you could put, most narcissists would be in this category, where they'll, the reaction whenever they feel defensive or, challenged, they'll basically just argue, they'll fight, they'll, attack even, they'll go into blame and so on. And so I think culturally that's a lot harder a behavior to deal with, and most workplaces tend to stamp it out, overtly, but there's a lot that happens covertly, as in it's more hidden. And when you're in a situation, you might be coaching someone who either they've got a direct report or a manager or a colleague who is, very confrontational. And so you might be helping someone how they navigate that. So if you receive direct conflict, direct confrontation, what might you naturally do? You might move away, or you might actually move towards and become more compliant. So understanding how each of these three work together, we talk about this a fair bit in the third unit on the leadership coaching, and understanding how these three often work as a triad in an organization. So, examples of coaching questions might be, when you feel uncomfortable, how do you notice that you respond? Is that working for you? What are the advantages and disadvantages of that pattern? What are the kinds of people that really press your buttons? What kind of behavior do you find that you really can't tolerate? Understanding that there might be one of those three. So someone could, for example, be very triggered or very, have an issue with someone else's pattern of becoming distant and critical, for example, particularly if it's your manager and you're wanting support and all of a sudden they've shut their door and won't talk to you, for example. So these three patterns of moving, remember it's moving away, moving towards, or moving against, they tend to kind of work in complexes where one person will have one and the other person will respond in a different way. So just helping someone to understand a bit more of the system, as in the different personalities and how they're all interacting as well. So I'm hoping that little framework will be helpful, just even to notice your own pattern, and thinking about what might be a more constructive way of, responding, and also the patterns of those people around you. Okay, I think my last point, no, I've got two more, so I'll go pretty quickly actually. So the other thing I might do in a coaching scenario, this comes from a particular leadership framework called adaptive leadership, is encourage a balcony view. So sometimes I use a helicopter analogy, flying above. Now I could even use a drone analogy. Imagine you've got a drone camera, you're looking at the situation from above. What are you noticing? What can you see now that you couldn't see before? Helping them to understand those underlying needs. I mentioned the defensive patterns, looking at solutions and so on. I won't go into the kinds of coaching questions because I've touched on that a fair bit, but that ability to step back and go, you know what, I'm being really grumpy right now. That's the first stage in awareness, is you're not just projecting that behavior outwards unconsciously. You're actually noticing, oh, I'm not really being the kind of person that I want to be right now. All right, okay, what's going on here? Taking some time out to decompress and see what's really behind that. So I'll just leave that as a seed there. I do think it's a skill actually that should be taught to children. That a lot of the coaching work that we tend to do, we're teaching this to adults. They're like, wow, I never even thought this was an option. Whereas where I could actually take a step back and observe my own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and look at alternative ways of responding. So I think it's a really important skill for anyone to have, but I'll say that for now and move on to my last point, which is really this whole, presentation in terms of navigating challenging situations, is this inner game of leadership, who we are on the inside, who we are psychologically and behaviorally, the kinds of thoughts, motivations, motives, mindsets that we have really do determine how we show up, what we pay attention to, how we respond to difficult situations and so on. So within any coaching scenario, we're really helping our clients to develop this inner game of leadership. This phrase came from someone called Bob Anderson, who's written quite a lot on leadership and coaching. And so we really use coaching to help build the client's self-awareness, help them to develop their own frameworks and resources to navigate the environments that they're in. And certainly high potential leaders are the ones that have really been able to manage the particular inner blocks holding them back, their own patterns of behavior that is no longer unconscious, so that they're more responsive rather than reactive. So there's a lot in that. I'll just pause before I go on and talk about our course briefly and see if there were any other comments that I needed to respond to. Someone said, worked for 20 years in finance, passionate about people and like to change career, a course to recommend for coaching in the workplace or family coaching. So I might just, Yelena, I'll come back to that in a few minutes, if that's okay. Just talking about who this course is for. And Ali agreeing that the top-down approach in terms of building that solid foundation of self-awareness, I think, is important. I agree. So I'm glad we're on the same page with that, Ali. So just briefly, in terms of if you did want to learn more about coaching, certainly there are lots of different courses out there, as I've mentioned. There are not many that have postgraduate qualifications that is ICF accredited. So this course is taught by people that are actually working as experienced executive and leadership coaches. And we really focus on knowledge that can be applied. So even after the first class, you should have something that you can go and practice on your friends and family. You don't have to wait until you finish the course to sort of bring it all together. And that a big part of this, I've already touched on this, is that developing that coaching mindset. Now, if you were to do this course, I'll go through this in a bit more granular detail, but it's usually completed over 2 trimesters if you do 2 units per trimester, or you could do 4 units per trimester. So that means you do it over 4 trimesters, which is about a year and 4 months, I think it works out to be, or any combination of the above. So we sometimes get people that start with 1 unit and then they do 3 units the next trimester. So it's really up to you. We offer all the 4 units each trimester. So it's really up to you as to how you work out your own timetable. So that's all actually I had to talk about the graduate certificate of applied coaching. But coming back to someone's question around, changing careers, I think that certainly, if you have an area in a business situation where you're a specialist in an area, someone mentioned finance, we've got people in education and nursing and so on, then coaching can be the kind of tool that you can add to your skill set, but in lots of different kind of levels of concentration. You imagine a volume dial. So it might be you stay in your current role and the people that report to you, you use more coaching in that situation. It might be that you look to apply for an internal promotion. You're moving sideways and you're managing people more directly, and you then get to apply coaching to your direct reports. It might be that you move more into an HR role, or a cultural change, or even a coaching role within your current organization, and your whole focus is on developing other people within the organization. Or you might find that you do it as a side hustle, as someone mentioned, and then you build that up, working with people via your own, say, private practice, or even working with other coaches who find the work and you come on board as one of their coaches. Or there certainly is work out there where you could get employed as a coach. Most organizations that are looking for, to employ someone full-time, you really would have to have quite a number of, hundreds of hours under your belt in terms of coaching. So I wouldn't suggest that you'd finish this 4-unit course and then be able to straight away step into full-time paid coaching work. But it might be something that you end up kind of building over time. And we have had quite a lot of people that will maybe move into doing their role part-time while they develop the coaching, and then eventually maybe look at doing, say, coaching as their own private practice, for example, full-time, and then resigning from their current role. So lots of different iterations. It really depends on where you're at. So hopefully that's answered that question. So just before we finish, I'd really love, we wanted to get some feedback. If you could go to Survey Monkey, and one of my colleagues is going to pop this in the chat, this link, and just answer super quickly. We've got 7 questions. Tell us what you think about the session. And we've got 2 $50 vouchers that we're giving away as a way of thanking you for giving us that feedback. So really love you to jump in. We've got the link from Ravina there. And I'd love you to jump in while you're still online to provide that feedback. Tanya, in terms of the entry requirements, a good question for this, because it's a postgraduate course. Basically, there's 2 options. One is, yes, you have an undergraduate degree, ideally in a similar kind of field like people management, psychology, it might be, even counseling, that kind of thing. And therefore you can step straight into postgraduate study. But the Australian government has really opened up the postgraduate study field in a really good way, where if you don't have an undergraduate degree in a similar field, you can enter this course, and you can enter any other postgraduate training in Australia based on your work experience that can it basically equates to the equivalent of university study. So if you have, I think we've said 3 to 5 years of leadership experience, so working with people, leading and managing people, then you can do this course without having an undergraduate degree. So our course advisors can give you more detail about that for your own, how it fits in with your own personal scenario. But those of you who might choose to do this course without having an undergraduate degree under your belt, I do encourage you, before you start, to do a little bit more research. We've got some online resources about writing academic essays and just getting yourself up to speed and giving yourself a bit more time to get used to, doing postgraduate study, because it's a little bit more of a jump if you haven't got that undergraduate backing behind you. In terms of the Sophie psychology qualification, I'm not sure how to answer this question, because we've got separate psychology training, and then we've got the coaching training. So the coaching uses evidence-based psychology, but it's not a qualification as such. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, Sophie. If I haven't, feel free to rephrase it and I'll answer it again. So that's all that I wanted to cover off now. So if you wanted to find out more, we've got our 1-800 number, 1-800-039-139. Our email address is connect@acap.edu.au. Ravina and one of my other colleagues is in the chat that can, and Rhiannon is in the chat that can answer any questions directly, and also contact you directly if you'd like to. You can send them even a direct message via Zoom. And I can answer any other questions. We might finish the recording in a minute or so, and I can answer any other questions.